Come with me on a journey down memory lane. I'm about 12 years old, and my English teacher is handing back a short story assignment. There, written in the margins, scrawled in that awful red felt tip pen, was the phrase, "Show, don't tell." As if that meant anything. My grammar, absolutely fine. My spelling, perfect. No complaints about my story structure either. So, why the heck had I lost points? All I had to work with was this mysterious phrase, "show, don't tell," which, taken at face value, let's be honest, is really stupid writing advice. It is, because by definition, when you write, you're telling. You're not showing, unless you're like using emoticons or something. Most of us aren't integrating visual media with our stories. All we have are our words. Fundamentally, all we can do is tell. But just because advice sounds stupid doesn't mean it should be automatically dismissed. So let's talk about what people mean when they say show, don't tell, and how, as authors, we can use this advice to actually elevate our writing and make good decisions. So first, let's talk definitions. Showing and telling are both methods used to communicate information to the reader. It's that simple. Show, in this context of the advice, means to describe something to the reader and then let them interpret that information and come to their own conclusions. Note, showing doesn't just mean visual description. It can be all sorts of different descriptions. Whereas telling means that as a writer, you just give the reader the conclusion. So let's cover a few examples and hopefully this should become a little more clear. For show, I could write something like, "Crunching through fallen leaves, I shivered as a crisp breeze cut through my hoodie." The same thing if I tell, "It was fall." Another example, right? For show, dusty cobwebs hung in tatters in the corner of the ceiling, barely visible through the evening light that trickled in through the boarded up windows. And telling that same thing, "The room was creepy." So when someone tells you to show, not tell, they're just asking you to describe something instead of directly giving the reader certain information. The thing is, both showing and telling are valuable tools in your writer toolbook. Each technique has benefits, and how you choose to balance between the two is unique to you and your style. You can't simply show everything in your manuscript, in your story. It won't make sense and it won't work. So let's dig into some of the benefits and downsides of each of these techniques and what it really means. So for showing, one of the things, the aspects of it, is that it adds details. These details are great. They can make your world feel full and real. It can bring your piece to life and make your reader feel immersed and invested in your story. But be careful. Too many details could overwhelm your reader. They might have difficulty knowing what information is important or lose track of the actual story. Just remember, not every description has to be a long-winded description. One of the aspects about showing is naturally it'll lead you to a higher word count. Even if you're a concise writer, describing things takes more words than just telling. So if you're word count constrained or find your manuscript ballooning, consider that you might need to have shorter descriptions or maybe replace some of those with telling instead of showing. And another feature of showing is that it adds ambiguity. Writing with this style means that your reader will have to use their noodles and interpret what you mean, which could be great. Complicated emotions or moods can't always be boiled down to a single word. Life is so much more complicated than sad, mad, or happy. This allows your reader to interact more deeply with the text. But it also means your story could be interpreted in ways you might not anticipate. Maybe you were trying to create a strong male love interest who protects their partner, but some of your reader thinks he's jealous and overbearing. Switching to tell, as you might expect, telling kind of has an opposite profile. So I'm not going to go into some of the points I've already made that are just, opposite of showing, but I want to hit on some other aspects of it. As you might expect, it's straightforward and it doesn't leave much room for interpretation, whether that's good or bad. It's efficient, it's bare bones, it doesn't take a lot of words. But that doesn't mean it's always clearer. Depending on the point of view you're using, telling can actually lead to point of view confusion, especially if you're working in third person. For example, if you write the sentence, Bob was confused, well, is the narrator telling the reader that Bob is confused? Or is another character watching Bob and thinking that Bob appears confused? Or is Bob himself feeling confused? These are subtle differences and a pretty benign example. But it's something you should consider when you're writing. And again, you are the author of your story. You get to decide when to use one technique versus the other in your particular story and for every different case. But I wanted to cover some scenarios I use and kind of general rules of thumb. So for me, I use showing when I want to build mood, tension, or atmosphere, right? When I want to create these senses like creepy or foreboding. Another one is emotions and emotional moments, especially complicated ones. If you want your reader to feel something, really feel something, you can't just tell them what to feel. You have to bring them into the moment.
Why is no one having a good time? I specifically requested it.
And that gets extended for moments where you might want a bit of ambiguity or mystery. Maybe your main character is investigating a crime. The character doesn't know what clues are, or which clues are important, rather. Why would your reader? Another fun one can be character insights and miscommunication. So here's a classic example that you often see in romance, especially in rivals to lovers or enemies to lovers. Consider the point of view character observes the love interest, perhaps sees them grind their teeth. The author often gives enough information and context that as readers, we might interpret or assume that this character is frustrated with themselves. But then the POV character assumes that the love interest is angry with them. That adds a level of nuance and intrigue that we can't get by simply telling. But that doesn't mean telling doesn't have its upsides as well. And I think they're really underrated. So the first place that I think it can be really useful is in imparting utility information to your reader, right? Magic systems, geography, politics, that kind of stuff where, you just need to tell them. You just need to get that information to them, and there might not be a lot of emotion behind it, right? The kingdom of Soren lies to the north. Great, thank you. It's useful, and just because you're telling the reader about the world doesn't mean you have to tell the reader everything all at once. That is called info dumping. Another great place to use telling here is when you've already given your reader the information. This is really common in sequels. Take Animorphs. Say what you want about it, but every single book takes the time to remind the reader of critical information about the world, the villains, the stakes, and it just tells them that information because they should already know it. You're just sparking their memory. Another one that I think is overlooked sometimes is accessibility. Depending on your audience and what you're trying to explain to them, you might want to just outright tell them the information. It can take a lot of brain power to read between the lines sometimes. And you, as an author, might just want them to know stuff. Another one that isn't talked about very often is humor. It can be hilarious to use telling to give the reader wrong, inconsistent, or ridiculous information. For a good example of this, go read some Douglas Adams. Another one here is stakes. Stakes are sometimes so important that you'll tell the reader multiple times what they are. Sometimes you might show them, and then other times you might tell them. It's your choice. But this is so important that you want it clear in your reader's mind. So let's take a case example here. And let's look at Hunger Games by Suzanne Collin. I think she has a very interesting, and I would argue effective balance of how she shows versus what she tells her reader in the beginning of her book. When I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold. My fingers stretch out, seeking Prim's warmth and finding only the rough canvas cover of the mattress. She must have had bad dreams and climbed in with our mother. Of course she did. This is the day of the reaping. I prop myself up on one elbow. There's enough light in the bedroom to see them. My little sister Prim, curled up on her side, cocooned in my mother's body, their cheeks pressed together. In sleep, my mother looks younger, still worn, but not so beaten down. Prim's face is as fresh as a raindrop, as lovely as the primrose for which she was named. Our mother was very beautiful once, too, or so they tell me. This has some wonderful showing. Not once in here does it say, I am poor, or life is hard, or I love my family. We as the readers are inferring that information, and it's so much stronger because we have to put those pieces together because we are feeling with that narrator, with that main character, with Katniss. But when we look at this, what is the information that the text, quote, tells us? This is the day of the reaping. Very clear, very clearly ominous. So by the time, not that long into the text, that Prim's name is called, as readers, we understand deeply how much she means to that main character. And we are also very clear on what the stakes are and what happens to people, what would happen to Prim if she went into those Hunger Games. The final and last thing I want to talk about here on the subject of show versus tell is what I like to call the show and tell. Now, for big plot points or themes, those things might come up in multiple places in the story. In some areas, you might want to show, for example, the stakes of breaking the law. And other places later in the book, for example, you might want to remind the reader by just telling them a line like, if I got caught now, they'd exile me and I'd never see my family again. That's perfectly fine and great. Good choices even. But that's not what I'm talking about here. When I talk about show and tell, I have noticed a pitfall in some authors, myself included sometimes, where you do both techniques back to back in the text. For example, you'll read a wonderful descriptive paragraph explaining a bitter cold morning and how your skin feels and how your fingers are curling and up on themselves and all this stuff, right? And then the very last sentence of the paragraph will say, it was a cold winter morning. You don't have to do that. You just spent an entire paragraph showing me the cold winter morning. You don't have to tell me. It's redundant, and it spoils some of the wonderful showing you just did. Just be aware and make an intentional decision for your story. That's really what this is all about. Whatever balance you strike between these two techniques, showing or telling, that's your choice. Because this is your story. You are the one who gets to best decide how to tell it.